Hello, and welcome to the Operational Skills for International Corruption Hunters, the online training and simulated investigation. My name is Tom Lasage. I'm currently a lecturer at George Washington University Law School in Washington, D.C., where we present a course called International Money Laundering, Corruption, and Terrorism. For the past 40 years, I've been involved in the investigation and training related to money laundering, corruption, and complex financial investigations throughout the entire world on literally every major continent in the world. Today, we're very excited to bring to you a new and very interactive program that relates specifically to the International Corruption Hunters Alliance. This program is going to center on a concept known as interactive learning. We feel this is extremely important because if you were to just listen to me talk for the next 40 hours and you were never involved other than listening, you probably would remember maybe 15, maybe 20% if we were lucky, of what I had to say during the next 40 hours. But if you actually were involved in the process, if there was an interactive component, if you actually did something through exercises, you would probably retain 60, maybe even 70% of what was presented during this program. And that's actually a good percentage. Let me give you an example. If we were teaching how to repair a car engine, and for 40 hours you had to listen to me talk about how to repair that car engine, at the end of the week, do you think you could actually repair that engine if we placed that car engine on a table in front of you? Probably not. Why not? Because you never did the actions. You never actually attempted to repair it. All you did was listen to me. But what if during this 40-hour full week program, we had an engine in front of you, and as we gave you instructions on one particular aspect of the repair, you actually did it. You took the wrenches, you took parts off, you put new parts on. And then at the end of the week, we asked you to actually repair part of the engine. Do you think you could do it then? Probably so, because you actually did the work during the week. You actually turned the bolts. You took the parts off, you put the parts on. Well, the same is true in this training program. If you just listen to me lecture for the next 40 hours, you're probably not going to remember very much, and you're probably not going to know how to actually do the techniques that we want to teach during this program. So the centerpiece of this program is a simulated financial corruption, money laundering investigation that you will actually be investigating. Not just listening to us talking about how you should investigate it, but you'll be making your own decisions. You'll be given source information to start the case, just as in the real world. And you'll make your own decisions on who do you want to interview? What records do you want to gather? What banks do you want to go to? How are you going to organize all this information once you get it? So you'll be making your own decisions, organizing the information, and preparing it for trial. You'll actually be doing, learning by doing, and that's the concept of this program. And of course, intermittently, we're going to have some lectures along the way that are going to provide the skills that you need to perform certain tasks, such as analyzing complex bank records where maybe you have 1,000 different entries. We'll show you how to organize that so that you can make these decisions very quickly by using the computer skills to do the analysis for you. So you're going to learn by actually doing. How are you going to do this? Well, you're not going to have to do it alone. We've assembled each of you in teams, and the teams will work on this together. So you don't have to do it together, you don't have to do it alone. You're going to do it as part of a group. And that's another important learning exercise. You're not only going to learn from doing, from actually conducting the investigation, but you're going to learn from the supplemental lectures that we're going to be providing, and also from your team members. If you think about it, all of your team members have a tremendous amount of experience. And this experience is going to be shared throughout this program as you're working this investigation, because people that have learned one aspect of this case are going to be able to share it with your other team members. So working in teams does not just facilitate the process, but it's actually another learning tool. So what are you going to be doing specifically? You're going to be getting some source information that's going to start the case, and you're going to follow the leads from that. In other words, you're going to read closely and analyze the material that starts the case. And just like any detective, maybe the famous detective from London, Sherlock Holmes. Many of you have probably heard of Sherlock Holmes. Very famous detective. What did he do? He followed the clues. He'd get one piece of evidence and he'd follow down the line what is the next step he has to take. And he'd have to think about the best way to proceed. So that's what you're going to be doing. Just like Sherlock Holmes, you're going to be following the clues or the leads, and you're going to be making the decisions on which investigative action you want to take. Do you want to interview this witness? Do you want to get these bank records? You're going to be making all these decisions. And along the way, you will be gathering evidence and developing evidence for not only the criminal case relating to the underlying criminal activity, such as bribery or abuse of office, but you're also going to be gathering evidence for a money laundering charge. And at the same time, when you're tracing the flow of the funds, you're going to be tracing the assets. And when you trace the assets, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be establishing the basis for a later seizure and confiscation of those assets. So we don't want to do all of these activities in a silo. We want to make sure that they're all coordinated and done at the same time, because they're overlapping. The investigation and gathering the evidence relating to the underlying criminal activity, whether it's the bribery or the abuse of office, is the same investigation that's going to show us where were the money laundering transactions. And when we trace the assets, that's going to show more money laundering transactions. It's going to show us where those assets are hidden. But even more important to knowing where they're hidden, it's going to establish the evidence that we need to make sure we can seize those assets and eventually confiscate them. And if they're in a foreign jurisdiction, then we're going to have to move those assets back to our country. We're going to have to repatriate those assets. So all this is going to be done as one single investigation. And another thing that we're going to be doing as part of this investigation is pursuing the international leads. Why is that? Because virtually every major complex criminal investigation relating to corruption and money laundering has an international element. That's because the government officials that are stealing money from your country, they're normally hiding it so they can use it in a foreign jurisdiction. Maybe they're building a beautiful house, maybe they have a huge bank account, but they're often hiding that money in foreign jurisdictions. So we need to be able to follow that money, seize and confiscate that money, and repatriate it eventually. How is that done? Through a concept called mutual legal assistance. That's a good thing. However, on the other side of the coin, mutual legal assistance is probably the single largest impediment to working a successful international financial investigation. Why is that? Because you have different judicial processes, you have civil law jurisdictions, you have common law jurisdictions, you have different techniques used by investigators in one country from another country. You have a variety of differences. And when one country makes a request to another country, all these issues come into play. So we're going to be talking about what are the best practices that you can use to assure that when you make a mutual legal assistance request, either at the investigative stage, the trial stage, or after the trial when you've confiscated and want to repatriate these assets, that we make sure that your mutual legal assistance is successful and that you gather the evidence for the criminal case and that you're able to repatriate those assets. So this will be something you will also be doing. You will be deciding which countries you want to approach and how you're going to go about that. And lastly, and most important, we want at the end of this program for you to be able to walk out the door and be able to apply all of these techniques to your real cases. Think about the example that I gave you at the beginning, fixing the car engine. If you just listened to me lecture for 40 hours, you probably would not learn a lot. But if you actually did the work on the car engine throughout that 40 hours, throughout that week, when you walked out the door and your own car needed a repair, there's a much better chance that you could actually repair that car. Why? Because you learned by doing. You actually did the exercise. And that's the exact same thing in this program. You're going to do the investigation. You're going to make the decisions. And so hopefully when you turn to your real cases in the real world, you'll be able to easily apply all these techniques, particularly the mutual legal assistance, as I mentioned, which is the largest hurdle in most of these large cases. So this is a very important aspect. So again, you're going to be conducting an investigation that's going to begin with source information. What type? Well, in this case, there's going to be two pieces of information that's going to initiate your case. The first is going to be from a simple newspaper article that's going to allege corruption by a particular official and make a number of allegations as to assets that he owns. And interestingly enough, the case that you're going to be working that's going to be based on this first newspaper article is really from an actual criminal investigation, from a real case. And that real case was not on a low-ranking government official. That case that was very complex and crossed international boundaries and was completely successful, both in prosecution and the seizure of assets, was based on the former president of a country. So it was a very significant case, and it was started in a very similar fashion to the way this case is started, and the facts of this case are also based on that real investigation. The second piece of evidence that you're going to be provided to start this investigation is going to be what's called a spontaneous transmittal of information from a foreign jurisdiction. Now, what is that? A spontaneous transmittal of information. That's something that's provided for not only by the laws of some countries, but it's also encouraged by the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, known as the UNCAC. And what is encouraged is that for countries, particularly financial center countries, that may have come across through one of their investigations information or evidence that indicates that possibly an official of your country may have been involved in a criminal activity, and maybe there are assets relating to that criminal activity in the financial center country, that country can send you unsolicited this information regarding your government official and the assets that he or she may have in your country. And that's commonly referred to as a spontaneous transmittal of information. So that'll be the second piece of information that you receive that are the case initiation documents for this actual investigation. And then, as I mentioned, your teams will then follow the leads independently from these two documents to initiate your case. Now, when I say independently, what are we talking about? We're talking about you're going to make your own decisions. You're going to have two facilitators helping you. Those facilitators are going to be myself and my partner, Jack Smith, who's also a lecturer at George Washington University Law School in the same course that we teach together. So he and I will be your facilitators. What does that mean? It means even though we're not going to have the ability to stand in front of you in the same room, which of course would be absolutely wonderful, but in this case, we're still going to be with you, but we're going to be speaking to you remotely through a process that I'm going to describe here very shortly. So we're going to be facilitating or helping you along, only if you get in trouble, but you're going to be making your own decisions independently. And again, when we talk about following the leads, how are we going to do this? You're going to take these two case initiation documents, the spontaneous transmittal of information and the newspaper article, and you're going to analyze them closely. And you're going to determine what clues are in there. And we would recommend something very important, that amongst your individual group, that you assign at least one person to take notes as to every lead or every clue that's contained in that piece of evidence that you're looking at, and write them down on a log or a list. Why is this important? Because as you progress through the investigation, you may look at one piece of evidence and find 3 clues that you need to follow. And the next piece of evidence is going to be 2 more clues. And you may have the tendency to want to rush off and follow this lead and see where that takes you. And then maybe 3 days later, you've forgotten about some of the other clues that were in that first piece of information. So it's very important to keep a list of every piece of information, every clue that you find in each document, so that later on you can come back to those and make sure that you've followed every lead. Just like Sherlock Holmes, follow the clues, decide which investigative actions you want to take. And you're going to tell us, my partner Jack Smith and I, what you want to do, and then we're going to provide the information for you, or the evidence. And we'll show you how that's going to be done in just a moment. So, what information are we going to provide to you? What information do you have to work with? We call this the participants' files. Okay, this program is based on what we call a platform, a simulation platform that was developed by the University of Maryland, and it's called the ICHA platform, I-C-O-N-S, the ICHA platform. And I'm going to show you now a screenshot of what this platform will look like when you view it on your computer. As you can see here, there's a number of tabs across the top. And these tabs are extremely important to you for working your investigation, for communicating with us, the facilitators, and for looking at other resource material that you may need. So let's take a look at some of the most important tabs that are included on this ICHA platform as you're looking at the screenshot of the simulation. First, we have the Resources tab. And if you were to click on the Resources tab, you would find that within that there are 2 main pieces of information. The first is a folder with all of the laws of the hypothetical country that you are living in to conduct this particular investigation. And the country that we have chosen that everybody will be living in and conducting this investigation is called Hypotheca. That's the country that you're going to be living in conducting this investigation. So we've provided for you all of the pertinent laws of Hypotheca relating to money laundering, asset confiscation, bribery, abuse of office. All the laws that you're going to be needing for Hypotheca are included in this particular tab, the Resources tab. The second thing that's in there are all of the PowerPoint presentations that we're going to be basing our lectures on. As we mentioned, it's not going to be just one lecture after another. No, you're going to be conducting the investigation, and at certain points during your investigation, we're going to ask you to stop, suspend your investigation for the moment, and we're going to give you some information by way of a lecture that you're going to need to continue with your investigation, such as possibly, what are the best ways to do mutual legal assistance? What are the best ways to prove each element of the crime to make sure that you've proven everything necessary to get a successful conviction? So these and a couple of other lectures are all provided for you in the PowerPoints under the Resources tab. And these PowerPoints will become available to you one at a time after each lecture. So that's the Resources tab. Another tab is going to be called the Evidence tab. Now the information in there is very interesting because this is where you're going to find all of the evidence that you're going to need to successfully work your investigation, to gather all of the needed information and evidence. But just like the real world, in a real case, if you think about it, if you're initiating a case on a particular individual who is in fact involved in criminal activity, the evidence that you need to prove that criminal activity, it's out there. It really is out there. It exists. But do you just look in the sky and say, oh please, give me all this evidence, and it falls on your lap? No, that's not the way it works. It's not the way it works in the real world, and it's not the way that it works in the simulation. In the real world, what do you have to do to get that evidence? You have to find the clues, find the leads, and pursue those. You have to physically go to witnesses and interview them. You have to decide which witness to interview. You have to decide which bank to go to. You make those decisions. And it's the same way in this simulation. In that particular evidence tab, all of the evidence you need is contained in that tab, but you can't access those particular documents until you ask one of your facilitators, myself or Jack Smith, until you ask one of us specifically what you want to do. Or I should say, not ask us, but tell us what you want to do. So you would tell us, you would say, we want to interview this individual. We want to go to Bank A, and we want to gather the records relating to the company ABC. Very specific requests. And then we will say, okay, that's a good thing to do. And at that point, we'll say, that evidence is contained, for example, in document 5. And then we give you access to document 5, just as in the real world. When you go to the correct place, you get access to that information. So this simulation is conducted as close to real world as is possible. So the evidence is out there, it's just you can't access it until you ask to do the specific activities that are going to get you that information. And at this point, I think it's very good to mention, I keep using the word, give us the specific request. So if you just say, I want to get all the bank records for this person in our country. Well, does that really work? Some countries do have a central database of accounts, but most countries actually don't have a central database of accounts. And I can tell you, Hypotheca, unfortunately, does not have a central database of accounts. So you're going to have to give very specific requested information. As I mentioned, you're going to have to say which bank you want to go to and what the account name is, because the banks are not going to go searching for you. You're going to have to tell them exactly what you want. Same as interviewing individuals. Tell us the specific person that you want to go to, and then we'll go talk to that person, okay? So that's what's in the evidence tab. All of the evidence that you're going to need to work a successful case. And your facilitators will help you along. So you don't have to worry, because if you get stuck at any particular point, then the facilitators will send you some clues, some additional clues to help you. So it's going to be a very fun process. You're going to be gathering the evidence, you're going to be putting the bad guy in jail, and you're going to be seizing all of his assets. So let's look at another tab on this ICONS platform. It's called the Logs tab, Logs. And what's in there? You're going to find an evidence log that we'll be describing in more detail a little bit later. And on that evidence log, you're going to list every piece of evidence that you gather, and not only listing the evidence, but you're going to be putting a couple of notes down there as to what that evidence shows, who the witness is, and we're also going to show you how to perform what's called a hyperlink, where you can simply click on a button and that evidence will pop up for you immediately. So we'll show you how to do this later, and we're going to show you all the advantage of using this. It's almost like magic. It's such a simple tool, but it is so helpful, in organizing your investigation, retrieving the evidence later on. So we'll talk about that. It's a very, very fun piece of material that's going to help you tremendously in organizing your case. How are we going to communicate with each other during this program? Well, there's actually two different techniques that we're going to use. One is on the Message tab and one is on the Conference tab. So let's start off by looking at the Message tab. If you click on that tab, at the top you're going to see it says Message, and then you're going to see over towards the right-hand side it says Compose a Message. So if you want to send a message or the equivalent of what would be an email to us, you're simply going to click on Compose Message, and once you do that, you're going to get a screen that appears like this. And you'll notice at the top, it's going to give you options on who you're going to send it to. So you can click Send it to all, or send it to any individual team, or send it to one of your professors. Now, I would recommend that normally you're going to send it to the professor that you're working with, because you're not going to want the other teams to see the evidence leads that you're following, because in some sense this is basically a friendly competition to see who finds all the clues first. So you're going to want to select the professor that you're working with, and you're going to click next to his name, and then down lower here in the body of the message, you're simply going to type whatever you want to say to the professor, such as, we want to serve a search warrant on the residence of Mr. X. Once you have your message, you simply click Send Message, and after you do that, this screen that we're looking at is going to disappear. This will take you back to the Message tab, which will show a record of the correspondence that you've had with the professor. In this case, you'll notice that Delta Team made a request for evidence on this date and time. Once the professor has received your request, he'll respond. This response will be indicated on the line below your request in this Message tab. Simply click on his response, and you'll notice a new box appears, and his response is indicated in this box, which says, in this case, what is your probable cause? So this is the main mechanism that you will use to have private correspondence between yourself and the professor to make requests for anything that's needed. Now, what's the next method of communication? That would be the Conference tab. So if we open the Conference tab, we'll see this screen. Now, what's the difference between the Conference tab and the Message tab? The Message tab will be used basically like an email system, where you can send private messages back and forth. The Conference tab will be used as a chat room where you can send text messaging between all the people who've been invited into this chat room. Now, conferences are normally going to be initiated by the professor. In this example on the screen in front of us, we show that the professor has initiated a conference. The conference is called Evidence Discussion. It's going to start on this date and time, and Alpha Group has been invited into this conference. Now, the professor could have also invited other groups into the conference so that Alpha Group could have communicated with members of other groups along with the professor. To join into this particular conference that you've been invited to, simply move over to the icon on the right-hand side that says Join. Simply click on Join, and you will immediately become a part of this conference and be able to communicate with all those who've been invited. Now, the second technique is going to be using the Conference tab. So let's take a look at that area in the icons platform, and you'll see Conference tab has been highlighted. In this situation, the professor is normally going to be the one who sets up a conference. And what's the difference between a conference and a message? A message is more like an email going back and forth, whereas a conference is going to be set up to be similar to having us all set in the room and exchanging ideas back and forth with each other. So once the conference is set up, you'll notice in the middle of this page, it has the name of the conference, it says evidence discussion, and on the far right, you're going to see where it says in orange highlighting, join. So you're going to want to click on join, and that will basically put you in the conference room. So we're going to do that now. And this is the conference room. And you can see the professor has started it by sending you a message that says, what evidence have you found? Now any of the members of your team or any of the other teams that have been invited to this particular conference can respond by using the message box at the bottom. And in this case, they say, we have found the secret bank account. After you make your response, simply click on the button called Submit. And once you've submitted that, that message or that response will go to the professor and to anybody else in the conference. So these are the two mechanisms that we're going to be using to communicate with each other. One is going to be the message tab, similar to an email. The other is going to be the conference. The conferences are going to be set up normally by the professor. You're going to receive a message via the message tab instructing you to click on conference and inviting you to join. So those are the two methods that we're going to be using, message and conference. Okay. So how are you going to proceed now? We're going to have you read documents 1 and 4 in just a moment, because those are those two source documents that we talked about. Spontaneous transmittal of information is document 4, and the news report is document 1. So we're going to have you read that. Then you're going to identify those clues, and you're going to tell your facilitators exactly what investigative actions you want to follow based on the clues that you've found. Following that, as I mentioned, the facilitators are going to respond to you, and you're going to be getting new pieces of information, and you're going to repeat the process over again. You're going to be taking the new information, try to find the clues, and you're going to continue along this route until you've gathered all of the information, all of the evidence, and then you're going to organize this evidence so that you'll have a successful prosecution and a successful seizure and confiscation of the assets that you've found. Not only confiscation of them, but remember, one of the key things we're going to be talking about later in the program is mutual legal assistance. Make sure that you can not only seize those assets, but get them repatriated to your country where they should be. Now you're going to be needing some tools, just like the person working on the car. You have the wrenches and the other tools that you need to work on the car. You're going to have tools available to work on this case. So you can assume that once this case is initiated, which is after you read those first two documents, number 1 and number 4, after that, you have an official investigation that's been opened, and you can now use all of the law enforcement tools that are normally available to you in your country to pursue this case and gather the information. What are some of those? Well, you can interview witnesses, you can conduct surveillance, you can do things such as internet searches. But you can also use compulsory measures. You have these available to you. If you have a witness that doesn't cooperate, you can serve them with a subpoena and compel them to cooperate. Unless, of course, they're involved in the criminal activity, and then there's a good likelihood that they will probably claim their constitutional right and say, I cannot be compelled to testify against myself. So you have these powers, but if a person is actually involved in the criminal activity, you're going to find that they may not cooperate with you. Banks almost always require some sort of compulsory notification, some sort of subpoena. So you have the ability to compel the production of bank records. The bank secrecy will be lifted by virtue of the fact that you have an authorized criminal investigation and you have the subpoena powers. So you don't need to worry about bank secrecy because you have these compulsory powers. Then you have the ability to analyze these documents, and we're going to show you some really fun tools on the Microsoft program called Excel, where you can take literally thousands of entries, and within the matter of a couple of clicks of buttons, you're going to be able to make sense of those. You're going to be able to organize them. You're going to be able to see the totals. You're going to be able to see who we should interview, where the money went, where the money came from, all going to be organized for you. So you're going to have these powers also. You can get public records. You can do mutual legal assistance. So you'll have all these powers available to you, and any other powers, search and seizure, for example, that you normally have available in your country. Okay, so that's what you're going to be doing for the first part of this program. And hopefully you're going to have a lot of fun at it. Because as I say, you're going to be following the clues. You're going to be just like Sherlock Holmes. But at the end of the case, at the end of the investigation, we're not going to just turn around and walk away from it. Why? Because there's more to be done. What do we have to do? We have to put the bad guy in jail. We have to seize the assets that have been illegally required. And in addition to that, we want to make sure we confiscate and repatriate those assets. So that requires some additional work. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to have to organize all of this information, get it ready for trial, and get it ready for the asset seizure. So at the end of your investigation, each group is going to have 3 tasks that they're going to have to perform. The first task is you're going to have to choose one money laundering violation in the country of Hypotheca, and you're going to find out, and we're going to talk about this later, Hypotheca actually has 3 different money laundering criminal statutes. So you're going to be allowed to choose which one you want to use to criminally prosecute the subject of your investigation for money laundering. And you're going to have to not only identify which one you want to use, but then dissect it into its basic parts, or what's called the elements of the crime. Tell us, what are those elements? In other words, what things do you have to prove? And you're not done yet, because also involved in this first task, you're then going to have to show, with the specific evidence you've gathered, which pieces of evidence are going to prove each element of the crime. Nothing different than what you would do at a normal trial. The prosecutor is going to make sure that each element is well proven. And that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to organize the evidence and show us which evidence is going to prove which individual element. So that'll be task number 1. And each table, each group will do this task. And we'll help you with this. And we'll give you even more specific information in just a moment, plus at the end of the program. So the second task is you're going to have to identify 2 assets that you've discovered through your investigation. And once you've identified those assets, then you're going to have to show us the evidence that links those assets to the underlying criminal activity. In other words, if he bought a house in London, you're going to have to backtrack with evidence showing how that house was originally purchased with proceeds of crime. So that'll be a tracing exercise. And your third task is going to be to describe the best practices or the proper procedures that you used in mutual legal assistance to gain access to the evidence and the seizure of assets in foreign jurisdictions. You'll have to tell us exactly what were the best procedures and how you followed these procedures to assure that you got the evidence that you needed to get the criminal conviction, you seized the assets so the subject to your investigation, cannot quickly take that money and move it to another account at another jurisdiction and show us the linkage back to the underlying criminal activity. So let's take a little closer look at each one of these just for a moment. So with task number 1, you're going to have to identify the criminal money laundering offense. There's 3 of them in Hypotheca. You're going to have to state each element of the offense. We're going to show you how to do that in a later lecture. Third task there is you're going to have to identify the predicate offense. What do we mean by that? What's the predicate offense? Well, every money laundering statute in the world is going to make reference to something such as having the transaction with proceeds of crime. So what are we talking about? Proceeds of crime. The money laundering offense is saying you first have to prove that this person earned some funds through some sort of illegal activity. What illegal activity? When it says proceeds of crime, they're talking about the predicate offense or the illegal activity from which he earned that money. So you're going to have to identify which illegal activity this person was involved in and provide us with a certain level of proof to establish that the money really did come from bribery or abuse of office or misappropriation of funds. Okay, so that'll be the 3rd section of this first task. And then the 4th section, the last one, is, as I mentioned before, to match the specific evidence with each element to make sure that each element is proved. Because if you don't prove each element, you should not be able to get a criminal conviction. So that's an extremely important part of your organization. Okay, let's look at task number 2 again. We talked about identifying 2 assets and then tracing the purchase of those assets all the way back to the predicate offense to make sure there's a linkage so that the judge will have no hesitancy to give us a confiscation order. Not only the judge in your country, but we also need to establish this firm linkage between the asset and the underlying illegal activity, because when you do your mutual legal assistance, the financial center country, they're going to want to see this information. They're going to want to see this evidence. Without that, they may hesitate to assist you in seizing the property unless they can see a linkage between that property and some sort of illegal activity. So it's extremely important. And we're going to suggest a couple of ways you can do this. You can do it by showing us a simple graph or a chart that just shows little boxes of, here was the London house, the money came from this bank account, which came from this shell company account, all the way back to illegal activity. So we'll show you some techniques on how to do that. And the 3rd task, again, talking about using the proper procedures for mutual legal assistance. We want you to tell us, did you use a formal process or an informal process? What was the legal basis for your request? Did you use a treaty? Did you use a bilateral agreement? Did you use what's called a reciprocity letter? And you'll learn about all of these. So you have to tell us, which one did you use and why did you use it? Because you're going to learn that you don't always want to use the formal process, which may be very time consuming. If you're just gathering public records, for example, you may want to use an informal process. And there are certain ways of doing this without violating the sovereignty of another country. So it's very important that the processes are the correct one so that you don't violate sovereignty and you get the information in the fastest but legal method. So you'll tell us which method you use, and we'll learn all about this later on. So you'll describe the steps for the most efficient process that you use. Okay, so those will be the 3 tasks. So what are we going to be doing in this program? You're going to be conducting an investigation. You're going to have tasks at the end of it, the 3 that we just mentioned. You'll be submitting reports on these tasks that you prepare. And we'll be providing some lectures along the way to help you with some of these skills. Now, lastly, what are we going to do right now? Once this video is done, what are you going to do? The very first thing is once the video is completed and you turn it off, you're going to begin your investigation. How are you going to do that? You're going to read documents 1 and document 4. Those are the source documents for your case. If you have any questions, what do? You simply send us a message through the message tab and we'll respond to your message. In addition to that, we're going to be sending you the information that you need at every phase through the message tab. You should be frequently looking at the message tab to be alert to incoming messages. So as soon as this video is done, the first thing that you're going to do is to read those 2 documents. From those 2 documents, you should make a list. Remember, it's best to assign somebody the task of keeping a log or a list of all the leads or clues that you find. So if you're going to make a list, then you're going to send us a text through the message tab, and you're going to tell one of your facilitators specifically what you want, and we'll respond. You tell us the specific investigative activity. Do you want to interview somebody? Do you want to do a surveillance? Do you want to subpoena bank records? If so, what's the bank? What's the account? Very specific. Okay? We'll respond to you. After you successfully gather that first piece of evidence, then we're going to ask you to stop for a moment because you've started your case successfully, but we don't want to let you get too far before we show you how you can keep track of your evidence, how you can keep a list of it and organize it and retrieve it and summarize it. And that's going to be using that evidence log that I mentioned earlier. So after you get that first piece of evidence, we're going to stop you for a moment. There's going to be another short video, a brief lecture, and we're going to show you first how this evidence log works and some of the benefits of it. I think you're going to find that quite fun and quite amazing also. So that'll be the next thing you do. And then we'll send you messages through the messaging tab to tell you all the steps that you need to be taking. So again, what are we going to do right now? Read documents 1 and 4. Make a list of the clues. Send us your specific requests. We'll respond. Once you get that first piece of evidence, we'll stop. We'll go on and talk about that evidence log. And after that, then you're going to continue with your investigation for a period of time until we ask you to stop again before we do the next lecture. Okay? If you do have any questions, please use your message tab. Send us a text and we'll help you. Good luck on your investigation. I have total confidence that you're going to get the corrupt official. You're going to gather the evidence to put him in jail. You're going to prove the predicate offense. You're going to prove the money laundering case. And you're going to seize and confiscate his assets. Remember, all within the same investigation because it's all connected and it's the most efficient way. Thank you very much.